Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first installment of the Fall 2021 Architecture Student Lecture Series. My name is Stella Shin, and I am joined by the Student Lecture Series, composed of Sarah Gates, Spencer Burton, Kazuki Misunaga, Malachi Mercado, Bidesha Bensal, and Tony Lin. The semester series is called How Does Architecture Stand? This question is posed to inspire a dialogue between the lecturer and the audience about the way architecture situates itself in an ever-changing world. As we are forced to handle change, we ask ourselves, how does architecture change for the changing times? How does architecture place itself? And how does architecture stand? Before we begin, I would also like to thank the countless faculty and staff members who have helped us along the way. This series would not have been possible without their generous support. It is an honor to have Kevin Sullivan, our first guest lecturer, joining us tonight. Kevin is the CEO of Payette, a firm nationally recognized by the AIA that won the 2019 Architecture Firm Award. He joined Payette in 1987, became a partner in 1998, and became president in 2014. Kevin is an alumni as well as the director of the Boston studio at Virginia Tech School of Architecture and Design. He also received his Master's of Architecture at Harvard. In 2012, he was elected to the College of Fellows with the American Institute of Architects for his contributions in design. Without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Kevin.
So can you hear me? How's this? Can you all hear me? Great. Well, it's truly an honor to be here, to be back presenting live. I think I gave like 6 lectures like this last year, and they were all remote, and so it's just wonderful to be in front of people again. The talk that I'm going to give tonight is entitled Fusion, and when I talk about fusion, it's really the fusion of design and performance, and I'm going to go through what that means to our firm and then use several recent projects really to illustrate how we're thinking about that currently. Some are built and some are currently under design. My firm, Payette, really is driven to create boldly original buildings for science and healthcare. We focus in these very high technology typologies. And we want them to be as profoundly humane in their accommodation of needs as they are pioneering in their pursuit of environmental performance. So we're taking a stand on really buildings being part of a larger system and contributing in whatever way they can. So here we are. That's my firm, 165 people, and we were the firm of the year in 2019. We're a really diverse group. 27% of our staff was born overseas. I find it remarkable that we have 32 countries represented in only 22 states. I'm completely baffled by that statistics in a way. And we're just as diverse in terms of where we are, but also where we do our work. And you can see there's alignment pretty much from where our staff comes from and where we do our buildings. We also are hosting this year the Virginia Tech Center for Design Research Open Lab. Bob Dene and Nathan King are collaborating in that with me, and it's a super fun group. I'm sure you know a lot of these people. They're having a great time. They're totally embedded in our practice, exploring complex urban issues and also fabrication. Really hope maybe some of you guys are interested next year. They've started off really with a bang. This is just an example of one of the fabrication exercises that they've done. There's 3 or 4 of these that are of equal stature to this one here, and they're just beginning to have one of their first big pinups for the conceptual design and master plan for a large urban site in Boston. And so tomorrow I'm going back in the morning to really look at that. So this is where they are right now. This concept of fusion is one that we talk about in a book that was published just last year. And we're really fortunate that it was also called out as one of the best books for holiday reading. I don't think when you do an architecture book, you don't think about it for holiday reading, but that wasn't so bad. So I wanted to talk about fusion and what it means. It's design and performance in our company. And when we talk about that, we talk about it in a number of different ways. In terms of design, it's our design IQ, how we explore our work, how we invent, and really the theory and ideas behind our work. But it's also about making and exploring through making and visualization as well as through construction. On the other side of the coin, we have a building science group that's pretty robust that actually helps us think about energy, building technology, envelope, sustainability, and a space strategies group that really is buried in the essence of the typologies that we do for science and healthcare and planning. And we bring these together to really synthesize these things in our work. And we bring it across a whole bunch of different platforms. So I just wanted to mention a few things about our building science group before we dive into the projects. We have 4 full-time building scientists. They're involved on 95% of our work. A tremendous amount of our staff are actually involved in research. Actually, we have 79 staff involved in research on 26 different projects right now. We develop a lot of tools, open source. My animations aren't working tonight, so this was going to show sort of multiple iterations, but we have a number of different tools. This is a form-finding tool that sort of tracks the impact of different solar operations on different facade strategies that you can manipulate. And we use it to sort of manipulate massing to really optimize the energy performance on our facades to sort of optimize, from a solar perspective, the amount of heat gain or cooling. Some other things that we're doing is exploring, we're doing research in embodied carbon. And the particular area that we're exploring right now is the envelope, because it makes up such a big part of the embodied carbon in buildings. And we've developed a tool called Kaleidoscope that, again, is open sourced, where you can manipulate all sorts of different materials assemblies and learn about those assemblies as you design the building and how they impact embodied carbon. I've had similar tools for glazing and winter comfort that are open sourced. They had a tremendous impact in terms of how our firm went from now using triple glazing on almost every project, so you can see the impact of that tool. And these tools that we're using are being used worldwide right now. So 46 states and 77 countries are actually using these cool tools that we're open sourcing. The advent of building science in our group has also had a profound effect on our trajectory as a firm, with our building science group starting around 2010. And you can just see the litany of awards that have come that have related to that integration. In fact, this year we received 6 national awards, 3 AIA honor awards for our work. Now, the most impressive thing is not those awards, actually. It's that we do these building types that are the biggest energy hogs that exist on Earth, essentially, is doing buildings. And you can see over this period of time that the average energy use intensity of our typical lab has gone from 350 EUI to 89. That's a precipitous drop over that time, and it's had a tremendous impact on the environment in terms of how we approach our work and how our buildings use energy. Now, with all of that behind what we're doing, I wanted to show you a series of projects that explore the concept of a veil as a very important performative part of the architecture, but also part of the expression of the building mass. This does not necessarily mean that I always design buildings with a veil. I could give a lecture on walls, but these happen to be, I think, 3 buildings in the moment that sort of tie together with an interesting story. There are 2 projects at Northeastern University, one that's built, the ISIC and the EXP. There's another project that we're currently designing at the Reagan Institute, which is an institute for Harvard, MIT, and Mass General Hospital that studies infectious disease research. Two Virginia Tech graduates, Lori Booth and Allison Truchka, are working with me on this project. And the Henshin Innovation Center in Henshin, China, it's on Henshin Island, which is fairly close to Macau and Zhuhai as well as Hong Kong. Now, performalism is a term that we use a lot in our book. And it explains a lot of different things that are important to us. I was educated primarily as a formalist, and as I've sort of weathered and endured as an architect, actually, I've sort of added a layer to that thinking that was so important to me in my youth. And for us, performalism asserts the inseparability of design and performance in our practice. It acknowledges the context of a project and explores how the building responds to stimuli. It considers the role of the environment, social geometry, and functionality in forming an organic unity conceived and made evident in the integration of materiality and composition. The word composition is an incredibly important part of that. Just because we think about performance, it doesn't mean composition is not part of the equation. So the first project I'm going to talk about is the series of projects at Northeastern University. And these projects are based on the concept of flow. The concept of flow through a site that sort of links the university from actually a rich neighborhood to one that's not so rich, linking the Fenway with Roxbury. This was a competition model that we did when we first were awarded the project, and it really shows the ambition of the project reaching across these Amtrak and MBTA tracks to connect one side of campus with the other with an exuberant and a vibrant new type of campus placemaking on the other side. This project, the ISAC, which is the first phase which was built, and the bridge, won the Harleston Parker Award, which was awarded to the most beautiful building in Boston built in the last 10 years. And it also was the recipient of several of those awards this year that I just spoke about. This is a view of ISAC. You get to see the building. There's a pedestrian crossing that crosses the tracks that is as much a piece of urban sculpture as it is a bridge. And then ISAC consists of two components. These collaborative office pods in the front, which are clad in a solar veil, and then this robust armature of research labs behind it, which are clad in a thermal overcoat. Both of them are screens. Some are screens that turn into walls. This shows the relationship of the two ISAC on the right and EXP on the left, which is the second phase project, the bridge that sort of connects the campus to the Roxbury neighborhood and the vibrant sort of urban space in between the two masses. As our design has proceeded, on the EXP, the building form is a little more robust than the one we had envisioned in our competition scheme, but you can see that the idea of flow and movement and this very energetic landscape is still very much part of the project. So as we look at the project ISAC from the campus, you'll see the pedestrian bridge here, the solar veil, and these sculptural light monitors that are on the roof. The bridge in itself is somewhat poetic in the sense that the sides of the bridge function much like the gills of a fish. So as you move across it, it opens, reveals a view of the city, and then closes back up again. So you experience it in a number of different ways with two very different senses as you move from one side of the campus to the other. Each weathering steel panel, almost like a Rothko on its own, or the sculpture itself like a Richard Serra as you move across it. This just gives you a sense of the gills as they open up, revealing the view of the city, the tracks, and the building and the landscape beyond as you approach from the other direction. Whereas if you were coming from the Roxbury side, you have an entirely different experience. And this, as you walk to the middle of the bridge, this reveals itself to you. So there's a deliberate tension surrounding this. These walls soar to 14 feet in height, but become the dimension of a handrail at both ends of the bridge. And you can see as you meander around the building, it reveals the skyline of the city as it does this. The project is really part of a very complex urban network. Northeastern University are all the buildings in blue. That's on the slide on the left. And these two buildings were the first academic buildings on this side of the track. So they had a very, very large responsibility to sort of bring some of that energy across the tracks. So the ground plane on the right shows you these movement systems and how they have formed the sides and edges and the interior public spaces of these two buildings in quite a dynamic way. So as we get a little closer, this is the view from Columbus Avenue from the city looking towards the ISIC at night. And then the constituent elements again in terms of how these systems come together to anchor themselves to the ground plane, the pedestrian crossing, the landscape system, a major auditorium clad in board form concrete, a cafe, a very porous building at the ground, and the two veils, the solar veils and the thermal overcoat with an atrium in the middle. This gives you a sense for the vibrancy of the urban life that abuts it on one side of the street and the deliberate contrast in the landscape from that intense urbanity. The landscape is actually trying to restore some of the natural vegetative features that would have been on this site in earlier times. Just a view of the landscape and some of those moments that transition from the building up to the pedestrian crossing back to the main campus. There are some really arresting views from the surrounding older side streets in Boston. This is our poor man's Bilbao moment, looking towards the building. And the solar veil itself was interesting. While it was under construction and it was moving along, one of the workers, we asked him, so how do you like doing this? And he said, you know, this is awesome. I invite all, with his Boston accent, he would say, this is awesome. But I invite all my buddies out here, but I really don't know whether I'm building a musical instrument or a spaceship, but I don't care. I love it. I thought that was like an interesting thing, that people see different things in it. So how did we come at that form? Well, we actually fabricated a lot of those components. So those fins, we had to get a sense of how they felt, what their proportions were. And this is one of those fins. We made these out of woods in full scale. We replicated these. We wanted to see what it felt like to stand behind them and look through them from the inside and from the outside. We also modeled them extensively to an extent that parts of the form of the building are dictated by the performance as well. So if we had some decisions to make about performance or form and how they work together, we used the parametric modeling and the software to really help us tune this. There was a really important moment in this project where the construction manager said, hey, we can save a ton of money by getting rid of half the fins. And our engineers from Arup retorted, if you do that, there's going to be a 25% increase in the mechanical systems, which would well exceed the cost of the savings in the fins. And it's that type of integration that we're looking for. On a cost per square foot, this is equivalent to many other buildings of its caliber. It's just that it uses that much less energy, and you're not paying for that. So these are just some shots of those fins. The catwalks in between, I like to think of this as the belly of the whale, and you can see this from inside the building. And from the street, as you approach the building, you'll notice there's this very diminutive entrance that's just below that curtain wall there, and that's the main entrance to the building. When you get inside, the space explodes. You can't anticipate that. Just some other detailing of the thermal overcoat. This just shows you that it's both a screen, a wall, and a wall. And there are moments in this assembly where It reads almost as a monolithic surface, and from some vantage points, you understand the porosity of the screen. The space that awaits you on the inside is of a scale that really you would not anticipate from the inside. And so you get a sense of the volume of the space, the sculptural quality of light, and this really interesting space that has all of the science facing inward, which is somewhat counterintuitive, to enliven the atrium. And also because there's a 6-story parking garage to the right-hand side of this building. So why look at that when you can look at this and create this new community for science that is divided into different layers, high-energy layers in dark green and low-energy areas in the lightest green and the white. So only 50% of this building is actually high energy. And so we're using the planning of the building to effectively change how we think about the energy profile. So you can just get a sense for the space, the spiral stair that connects all the floors, the skylights, and how the form language of this idea of flow and movement permeates every facet of the building. The building, when you're in it, is like a living vivisection. You can see everything from one side to the other. You can see every piece of science on every level. And it's an exciting place to be. It's their most popular place on campus for Northeastern. It's become almost a problem for the scientists at the moment. These are just some other views looking at the layering of the lab. The layer on the right from the atrium, a tempered glass layer looking into the laboratory, separating those different environmental compartments so that we can modulate the energy profile. Some views looking from the office pod and the break areas back to the lab, and some details looking out. The auditorium's an interesting inversion of the language that we have on the outside, where we've used wood fins much in the same way that we use the anodized aluminum on the outside. In this case, actually using wood, where on the outside our initial idea was wood, but we realized it wouldn't weather in the long term the way we would like, and so we went with an aluminum that had a rich sort of array and texture to it. This section sort of summarizes a lot of the performance strategies that we employed in the building. If you were to compare the energy that we've saved in this building against the 2030 baseline for this type of building, it's the equivalent of 1,300 houses annually that we saved. So that's a tremendous amount of energy. The building is sort of interesting in that it uses a cascade air system to use the atrium almost as the lungs for the building. And so it's passing through air and using it several different times along the way until it makes its way to the laboratory. So it's fairly innovative on that level. The next building, the EXP, has a very different strategy. It's made out of brushed stainless steel with horizontal fins that sort of undulate and meander across its facade. Building this model was incredibly important to sort of understand the form language of the skin and how these different pieces were subtractive, not additive, and built from a single membrane used to formulate its enclosure. These renderings give you a sense of what this will look like, but I've found it incredibly frustrating when you do this type of architecture that there's no rendering that can actually convey what it really looks like, and we found that the same on the other project. This gives you a sense how the two buildings work as they approach from campus. The EXP is much taller than the ISIC building, and we're using the original nodes in the center of the courtyard really as the pearl and the oyster in terms of how the landscape works together. Now, the skin on the XP was a fascinating thing to explore, particularly if you unroll it. And this drawing is unrolling the skin and looking at those undulations in the facade as they go on that journey around the mass. What's also interesting is sort of what's behind it and also the numbers of pieces that are needed to make this. And we're always doing these drawings, mapping the pieces that are required to sort of minimize the pieces, but to optimize the effect. of the architecture. We modeled this many different ways. And so you see here's a model that's a quarter-scale piece of the facade. We also were building full-scale mock-ups of some of these different proportions of these fins, and then we actually built a fin itself to just understand what that would feel like and what it would touch. That braille-like surface on the top is actually what we're using to keep the snow from sliding off, but it creates a really interesting texture on the building as these fins fold along their journey. So this is a full-scale mock-up of the different layers of those fins where it exists almost as a panel on the bottom, starts its journey in folding, and then in the third wing from the bottom, it's almost like a blade, like a knife. And the only thing you have to imagine in your mind is that each strand that goes around the building goes on this journey from something that looks like on the bottom to something that ends up like one of those blades and then goes back again to that panel. So this is like a very interesting, different building, a relative of the ISIC project, but not a sibling, probably more like a cousin. And we felt that was good in terms of the way the two buildings should work in an urban way, not being the same, not being monolithic in terms of the role of the institution in the city. The form language of the building actually had a profound effect on the ground plane of the project. And this drawing's just fascinating to me. It's mapping the terrazzo in the atrium of ISIC, the two-tone concrete in the indoor landscape spaces, and then the terrazzo in the EXP into one sort of organic system. The EXP is a very different building on the inside. Since ISIC did the heavy lifting, it has an incredibly dense sort of research agenda, as well as makerspace and things like that on the lower levels. It's also going to have a different way of thinking about light. And so what we're doing in this building is the center of the building here, we're actually painting with a very dark gray wall so that the light explodes from these crevasses in this pinwheel geometry. My colleagues and I had made several trips to Amsterdam during the construction of the first building when we were reviewing the mock-up. And I was quite taken when we did a sojourn out to Utrecht by Wielerit's library there, where the whole library on every surface is painted black. And you just have a profound understanding of what light means in that space by that inversion. Now, we're not painting every surface black. The insides of the labs are black, but the outside wall of the building is this dark gray as well. And again, it's really so that you have this totally different understanding of how light works within it. The upper floor of the building is very different. There's a roof garden, a faculty club, a boardroom gallery, and the president's office. And there's all sorts of things that I could talk about up there, but we're having a lot of fun with fabrication in terms of these guillotine doors and the ceiling. Now, this next project is one is very close to my heart. I'm working on it right now. I think it's one of the better buildings I've worked on. And this is the Reagan Institute. And the Reagan Institute has this odd triangular site. And they do infectious disease research. In fact, they were the genesis of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So the origins of that vaccine came through the Reagan Institute. And this project was an exploration of how to use this odd geometry of this freestanding site in Kendall Square, which is the heart of the biotech world, right on MIT's campus, and use it as an advantage. And so what we developed was this sweeping form that is 3 stories high higher on the left-hand side of the site than it is on the right-hand side of the site. And the roof line and the form goes on this amazing journey around the buildings, sinuously going from one end to the other on this really interesting journey. There's a tremendous amount of landscape, too. We're surrendering almost 50% of the site to landscape, restoring almost the idea of an urban forest in the center of Cambridge along Main Street. And you'll notice that there's also a second-floor roof garden that's in this sort of crescent cutout in the middle of the building, which was done to sort of reduce the monolithic quality of the street wall, but also to give a very distinctive and special place to the researchers on the upper floors. Where on the lower floors, which are clad in 20-foot-high single-span pieces of glass with no structural support whatsoever. So the base is entirely transparent as it fronts Main Street. So let's get into this. So this is the site, this odd site. And you can see even on this figure ground of the upper floors how the laboratory bar and the office bar sort of form this atrium. But I wanted to call out another unique thing about this site. The Reagan was involved in the vaccine. Moderna was developed right next door, and Pfizer was developed across the street. From 600 feet of each other, all these vaccines were created. This is like the epicenter of life science, not just in the United States, but in the world. It's a fascinating place right now. The ground floor plan is a little different. You'll notice as it opens up towards MIT at the bottom of the page there, there's a sort of this narrow band that's sort of like a river opening into an estuary towards Main Street. So there are large auditoriums and things that front Main Street with a daycare center and other things like that facing MIT. The architecture surrounding the site is entirely unremarkable, other than Charles Correa's Brain and Cog, which is right next door. It's developer architecture. There's no materiality, nothing at all. So we just wanted this building to be fairly quiet. And we chose to clad it in a building that's much like the limestone that some of the classic buildings are clad in at MIT. You can see Frank Gehry's Stata Center in the lower left-hand corner, for those of you who are curious what that is. So it's a very interesting neighborhood. There's also a park directly across the street from us as well. When we started the project, we looked at a whole bunch of different iterations. This is before we knew our client. And we had our interview, and we talked about a bunch of different ways that we could think about the site. And almost immediately, they picked this one. So we were on our way. And the scheme that I've been describing is that original scheme, but it has these two very different elements. This very animated ground plane, and then levels 2 through 5 on the upper floors are this very private realm of infectious disease research. And so those are the things we're playing with. And what we chose to do is to enhance the sweep of this curve, is to just have a simple array of fins move its way around that perimeter and to change along that journey, much like the profile of the roof does. But there's almost no detail other than that. It's a very quiet building in this arena. So from this aerial view that you can see, you get a sense of that. You get a sense of the landscape and its impact as well. And then as you look from across the street, you have a better sense of actually the scales of the cantilevers at the base of the building, the transparency, this oculus garden that's in the center. But these urban cantilevers really become these very interesting spaces. I don't know how many of you have been to see the Mass by Lina Bobardi in Sao Paulo, but there's a fascinating urban space under that building. This is very small by comparison, but really we're trying to create almost a theater with the landscape in front of the building. And this just gives you a sense of how that works and how that system of landscape works around the base of the building. From the urban grove and the cantilever, the oculus garden, and then ultimately the system of elements that make up the building. So in terms of the geometry of the building, there were a couple things that were incredibly important. One was to sort of, in going on this journey, this three-floor journey from one side of the site at the other, the building is at the scale of its adjacent neighbor at the top of this diagram. It's at the same scale as this building. But as it comes down here, it starts to align with some of the buildings on the other side of the street, forming almost a gateway as you leave one part of Cambridge and you enter this Kendall Square neighborhood. Likewise, the face of the building on the end here becomes a new facade at the end of the park that's on the other side of the street. So these subtle cants in geometry pull together these relationships. Now, the interesting thing, too, as an architect, you often have a lot of very complex issues to deal with. And one here is zoning, and this is just showing you how we touch the zoning envelope on one end and actually are well below on the other end. And this was an incredibly important tool for us to sell the building. So this is a model of the fenestration system that we use to sort of explore it and to get a better understanding for the language of fins. And this is the figure ground of the first floor. I'm just going to show you a couple of the plans and the geometry of the upper floor. And then these are going to be some views sort of looking from the inside out to the Oculus Garden, up the central stair, around the atrium, and then back out towards the Sky Garden on the second floor, and then the aperture on the back. And I have my back to the sort of cafe looking back into the atrium, and then up. A couple more views of the exterior, then I want to get into some of the prototyping that we did that I think would be interesting for the students. So this is the view looking west from the urban grove, from the opposite side looking at the colloquium spaces at the base of the building. At the south end of the site, which is very close to MIT, you get a hint of this daycare garden and this really playful play structure that's part of the daycare garden near the MIT entrance. The materials are quartzite at the base, along there with a timber curtain wall and these full-height structural glazing units along Main Street. And an FRP fin system on top of a curtain wall on the upper layers. These are how those materials translate to the different facades of the building. And you can get a sense of how the rhythm of the fenestration changes as you move around it. Now, in terms of these pieces, it's not unlike what I showed you at Northeastern, where there is this fabric that you unroll and you look at, and then you start to play with the shapes of these fins, the underlayer of the facade behind it, as well as the numbers of pieces that put it together. This just shows you the sort of the widest panel and how it transitions, the widest panel at the penthouse and how it transitions to the smaller panels. And these very complex forms start in a very innocent way, with forms cut out of paper that you explore almost like a first-year student, given your strips of paper to figure out what to do. Only this time it's a facade on a building. It's not just strips of paper. Those strips of paper, though, turn into a building and allow you to really understand the magnitude of what you're seeing both from the outside and the inside. And then you prototype them. You build large pieces. You find out you don't like them so much, so you build them again. You go smaller. You start to get a little more precise. You actually build full-scale pieces. You hate the way it turns the corner, so you build the corner. And finally, you find your way. And ultimately, we end up in a place we're looking very, very precisely at these components, and then we're building them full scale too, and getting a sense for how they come together. This was also part of a very elaborate strategy to sort of understand the solar benefits of peak solar gain on a summer day and how to optimize those things. So we used these tools to sort of tweak the geometries of the panels, to refine the formalism that we were using, to actually enhance the performance of the building by just making some subtle tweaks that we're highlighting here. And so you can see this one corner of the building here where it really wasn't working well. That's in the top image, and we actually started to densify the panels slightly differently. It's not a different idea of a building, it's just a smarter building that's working better. The intent never changed. So that's one project. The next one is the Jewel and the Mountain. And this is a crazy project in Henshin, China. It's an innovation center. For those of you who are familiar with the Media Lab at MIT, it's like a Media Lab on steroids. It's got a conference component to it, which is that white jewel in front, and then it has an R&D component, which is the tower behind it. It's in this crazy place called Science City that they're building all at once. And it's to be used as a sort of an incubator, if you will, for that whole research enterprise that's being built around it. It connects to an urban park that runs along an elevated highway that is that arcing area in white on this site plan. In one sense, the idea for this building was to actually have one part of it that's part of the ancient world, almost like a mountain. In this case, it's brick that's jagged and rough, and to contrast with the future, something that's synthetic, brilliant, and cool, the jewel in the front, which houses the conference center. We love building things, so we had this complex form, and we had to sort of learn from making it. And this is sort of the model that we had of that project, where you can see all these forms come together. Now, when you meander up from the ground plane to the roof, the landscape goes from a journey that's very verdant and green, almost like a rainforest at the base, to very barren and rough at the top of the building. And so you'll see there are these hanging gardens that sort of are clinging for life at the top. This section of the building is very easy to understand. You have a conference center with auditorium and conference rooms on the right, and then this high bay makerspace R&D extravaganza on the left, with a crevasse in between them. The site plan shows how these systems come together to sort of weave into the overall Science City complex. And the idea of the building almost as a cultural landmark was important. It needed to be very visible to work at 50 miles an hour from the highway, but also to work for the people within Science City. So there was a very complex web of connections that we had to navigate. These are some images that show that ground plane that sort of goes from 2 floors in the air down to grade, linking with the park, and then the greenery that's clinging to the mountain. We had a lot of fun with these elevations, and in particular sort of thinking about the faceting of the building and how it responded to the movement systems at grade and how they influenced the form. We also had a little fun thinking about the materiality, the brick. By building it out of something ancient, we looked at the pottery that was indigenous to the region and wanted that to actually be the tone and the coloration of this older part of the building. We almost wanted the brick part to feel like it was always there, and they built Science City around it. We studied all sorts of brick textures and patterns, but came quite quickly to the point of thinking about corbelling, taking advantage of the corbelling where the changes in plane of the brick changed from a vertical surface to something that was chamfered, and using the corbelling in those areas. These just gives you some other vantage points looking to the complex from Science City. And now back to the same principles where we used our tools to sort of reevaluate the form, to tune it, to make it better. And also used our tools to think about the systems that made up the structure that put together this jewel. A very, very complex form. You can see there are multiple layers of structure. But at the same time, the structure becoming something quite poetic that you inhabit at the rooftop or even in between these membranes, learning from those lessons at Northeastern, where that in-between moment was maybe the strongest moment in the building, but we couldn't really inhabit it. In this building, we want to be able to do that. So we looked at precedents as we looked at details, and we also concealed fairly simple things behind this veil. Just a series of stacked, nothing curved. These are straight panels of glass behind this very elaborate screen. So in order to achieve difficult things, you have to do some things simple. So this just shows the programmatic layering, the conference center on one side, the R&D center on the other, the main entrance and the drop-off, the ancient brick, the jewel above, the canyon in between, the lush, verdant landscape that gives way to the mountain above, and some of the lobbies and spaces that surround the building, as well as some of the auditoriums up above. Really interesting space is at the second floor, the terrace level, that is where the landscape moves up to. It's an exhibition space. This gives you a sense of that terrace from the outside in between the two buildings, but when you get inside, you get to a magical moment where this sort of vortex or torrid form comes down to sort of meet you at this basin of water that's open to the sky above. Other meeting rooms up above, and then the sky bridge connecting the two buildings above. So looking at time here, I'm just going to breeze through a couple things with not nearly the detail that I just went through. Another building that has the concept of a veil is this building at Amherst College that defines a new horizon. It's a science center. And we used weathering steel to clad these three pavilions. And these pavilions are to speak to the scale and texture of the original campus at Amherst. Transparency was a key theme here, particularly on this west wall as you look into that science center. And in plan, you notice the relationship of these pavilions in scale to the original grain of the campus. So we didn't build red brick pavilions. We built weathering steel pavilions that are screened, that plugged into this linear spine with this big workhorse for science behind it. So this is how the plan works. And these are how the pavilions sort of present themselves in the landscape and begin to shape campus space, acting as a filter between multiple layers of space, but also between the inside and the outside. On some level, there's no detail. On another level, there's tons of detail. Just some views from the inside here. Again, lots of performance concepts that have to do with the solar array on the roof, an integrated skylight system, how we use that to sort of capture air and do all sorts of different things. And you can see how that works on the inside. Many different strategies for this fenestration that I won't get into. And then, again, a highly performative building that is saving 1,500 houses worth of energy annually from the 2030 baseline. Really cool project in China that prototyping drove it, which is a 5 million square foot hospital, which is defined by these twin dragon patient towers on top of these diagnostic treatment platforms with a landscape that goes in between. It's at a scale that I've never experienced before. They see 140,000 outpatients a day here, to give you an idea of that. That's like an airport, a big airport. This gives you a sense of the landscape permeating the building and just how these systems work. But what we studied here was the window. It repeated 2,600 times in 2,600 patient rooms. And so we wanted to get it right. And it had to work from the inside and the outside. We wanted it to be a room within a room that would be comfortable enough that two family members from two different families might sit there. And so we built it and we studied it, but we also thought about the way it worked in terms of how those windows, apertures, shaded the sun, optimized the sun, and optimized the daylight for the building, but also optimized the energy. We got it to the point where 65% of the area in patient rooms has daylight autonomy from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's pretty different when you think about the coarseness of the light in a hospital, not needing that institutional light. And it also is utilizing natural ventilation 42% of the year. Trying to be able to do something like that in the United States. I can't yet. We're not ready for that type of thing. So there's one other part of our practice that's a hugely important part of our practice is pro bono. We've actually created, after many years, we've actually created enough revenue so that we can do pro bono in perpetuity. And so we're consistently doing pro bono work, which started with this image here, which is a hospital in Haiti we did after the last earthquake. And we've been doing it ever since, but we're just looking for two things. We want to do projects that are going to make a difference, but they have to be beautiful. We're not just there to help. We want them to be beautiful too. And so we end up working with some clients for quite a long time as we try to do this. And one of those clients is Beyond Walls, which is in Lynn, Mass., which actually was one of the projects that won the AIA Honor Award this year. Pretty cool that you can win the highest award that you can get as an architect in the United States on a pro bono project. And basically this project was all about taking this old industrial city and putting art in the center through light, through murals, and all sorts of different installations. And this map just shows the impact that we've had with these interventions on the city over the last 4 to 5 years. So we started slow with the light, and then actually started doing more than just the light. So you can see the state of the underpasses, the state of this sort of sad industrial town, the way the murals actually have started to change the place, the way the light has started to change the place, the way people have started to feel differently about the place. It's had a profound, profound impact. These were dangerous places that no one wanted to go. Now they're places where everybody wants to go. It's spurring all sorts of development. We've even started, in recent years, designing an app so people that are walking by can actually control the lighting through their phone. It's created a spectacle, in a sense, and it's really, really fun. So you guys should go there at some point. We also wanted it to be pretty energy efficient. They were really worried about it. This is a town that doesn't have much money. So we were saying, so that at the end of the day, it was, it's using $8.75 in energy a night. So they said they could afford that. And we're glad they did. And that's the equivalent of 16 regular streetlights. Now, what we've been doing recently is during COVID, this town has a very large homeless population. And during COVID, they were really concerned about access to hand washing and things like that. And so our fabrication team built these hand washing stations, as well as we started to build some areas for pop-up restaurants and things like that out of this folded stainless steel. And so some Virginia Tech grads worked on this and installed this all over the town. And actually this has been used in over 7 different cities in New England, and also Houston wants to utilize it as well. just shows you this very simple idea that has very profound implications. So that was our urban design thing. The last thing is this bizarre sort of curiosity that I've had in my career, and it's also a pro bono project. But throughout my career, I've been working on these things, what I call our roof buildings. And it started like over 20 years ago on this small hospital up in northern Maine where the locals say, Kevin, I don't know what you did. It's sort of like you gave us a potato barn for a hospital. And it was this underground surgical pavilion where I was infatuated with the way lights would come down into this form where surgical patients were recovering below. Then I worked on another hospital. Then I actually worked on a science building, a very specialized infectious disease laboratory at Penn State, which we nicknamed the Bio Barn, because it was on a farm, and it sort of looked a little like a barn. But finally, I'm getting to do a barn for pro bono, a real barn. And we're doing a number of different things for Land's Sake, which is an organization that it's just outside of Boston. It's on this pristine site, and they donate most of their food for hunger relief. So it was a cause we could get behind. It was a site to die for, and we wanted to get involved, and we've been working with them for 4.5 years, helping them with their vision, helping them with fundraising, and now we're building it. Their farms existed for 40 years in this shabby chic farm stand, and what we're doing for them is a new farm stand on the same location of the existing one, as well as a children's animal barn. And this just shows some of the planning and the siting of the buildings, which are using some first settlers building techniques, but actually exploring those things in modern forms. And these are still very preliminary images for the farm stand, so you can get a sense of that. We're using all sorts of interesting systems. We're using heavy timber framing that's traditional. We're using CLT for the diaphragms in the building as well as the roof planks. And you can see there's an array of solar panels, which is defining the building in many ways. The animal barn is sort of a multi-layered thing that is, on one level, able to be totally open and totally enclosed. They need it to be totally enclosed for the feed for the animals in the winter. But it can actually be totally open, almost like a pavilion, for the summer camps that they have in their educational program. So it's a very modest structure. It's sort of a roof over a small container on the inside. But some wonderful, wonderful opportunities to experiment with detailing that you almost never get to do. But because you're doing pro bono, you get to do something you don't always get to do. And so, just like the other one, it has its system and its kit of parts. But more interestingly, the thing that's been so fun about this, it's the only project I've ever worked on in my life where we've harvested the timber from the very place that it's going to be built. So we got to know the trees that made the building. In fact, we got to know the tree that became the central mast for the barn. And you can see this cylindrical column in the center of the building. This is a very preliminary rendering. We're going to actually use this tree with these branches to support the building. So it's going to be quite the barn raising, I think, when they do this. So that sort of concludes my talk. I know I took you on quite a journey. So I had those 3 projects that are very close to my heart right now. I think this pro bono project is very close to my heart. And I think you guys asked a very provocative question, how does architecture stand? So I first wanted to say architecture to me and to my firm is very important in the way that our practice is mission-based. We do buildings that help people. That's why we do healthcare, and that's why we're so involved in science and education. But knowing that's aside, and that I have this formalistic bent a little bit. I feel that architecture should embrace both art and science to make its poetry visible by taming complexity to make the pragmatic invisible. So that may be, not everyone may agree with that, but I thought it'd be a good way to end the lecture. Now, it has a simpler translation, which my friend Z. Smith has. And his is, if it's not beautiful, it's not performing. And if it's not performing, it's not beautiful. So thank you.
We can take questions now. I'll go around with the mic.
Thank you. Would you mind talking a little bit about the workflow in Payette? In particular, how does performance step into the design? And in which phase does performance become an actual thing in design?
It's interesting. It's involved in many different points in time. So, for instance, if say we're doing a design competition and we're evaluating several different options, and we want to understand the impact of a building being positioned this way or that way, or being on this site versus that site, and understanding what the relationship is between some of those moves and, some of the solar issues that I was showing, or wind, or other things like that. That's a moment where getting that feedback at just the right moment before you fall in love with anything too far, it can influence a lot. And then you sort of, at the macro level, you make those decisions. And then you go away and work for a while. You have to sort of figure out, what you want the project to be. But often what we do while we're doing that is we construct what we call a shoebox model, which is a slice of the building, not the whole building, but a slice. And we look at different combinations of strategies with that, the ratio of wall to glazing, things like that. And again, trying to do that before you fall in love with something to understand what has a lot of impact. And then you go away with these criteria, and then you sort of work for a while, and you do fall in love with something, and you test it, and you vet it, and you use that to sort of polish what you have. And so on some level, I find it to be quite liberating, because sometimes as an architect you're in these moments where you're making some decisions, but you also feel like you're making them just because you feel a certain way. And I think that's fine. Sometimes you need to see the hand of the architect painting, but there are other times where it just gives you this little nudge that's like, you know what, that helps me make this other decision and move on from where I am. So it permeates our work in a lot of ways. It affects how we think about material choices, all sorts of different things. So that's why one of the partners in our building is a building scientist, and she's involved on every single project. Her name's Andrea Love. She's pretty well known out there as one of the premier building scientists in the country right now doing what she does. And then she has a team that's embedded in our office on every project, just like we have a fabrication team that's embedded in our office on every project, working on, with the team, on site, on little models and big prototypes and things like that.
So my first question is, what software do you use to determine the solar efficiency of a building? And then in general, what softwares do you use in your firm?
Yeah, well, you're asking the wrong person on that one, I have to confess. I mean, we use a ton of Grasshopper for a lot of the scripts that we run. A lot of our projects have custom scripts for a lot of the analysis that we're doing, so it's a plug-in to a lot of the apps that we've developed. So a lot of these things that I just showed you, you can use. You can go to our website, you can download it, and you can use them. We're going to be doing that with the studio that we're teaching this fall. Andrea is going to be doing several seminars, and it's going to be very easy for them to sort of model and assess their site in a very rudimentary way, just understanding how these tools can influence some of the decisions they're making. I don't want these tools to become design. I want them to sort of help inform the design. It does not take away the hand of the author, the hand of the painter. You still have to do that. It just makes you a little better at it, actually. It's not just whimsy. There's really something behind it. So if you want to send me an email, though, I can answer that more thoroughly with a little more background than I can give here.
Okay, sorry. So when you showed us the hospitals that you're working on, I was like so intrigued. It's so far different from the conventional floor plan that we usually like see in hospitals and healthcare facilities. And I was wondering, for that like such an innovative, out of the box design, what was like the most challenging aspect of that design?
Well, this is not going to, the elevators were, it's not a poetic answer, but when you think of something zigzagging like that, you're taking something that's the most deliberate thing in the world and trying to hit it in the right spot. That was something that we had to work very, very hard to allow that not to be something that undermined the idea. I could have given an entirely different lecture. This was almost all science tonight with that one little piece. I could have given one about our healthcare practice and called it Embedded Nature. And it's all about how we embed nature in a hospital and use that as the fundamental idea for the planning of those structures, which is totally at odds with the way most hospitals are designed. And so that hospital there was, it was how do you do something that's that monolithic and not make it completely monolithic? How do you try to give each one of those patient rooms a view out to the landscape, not just into a courtyard? And so a lot of that had to do with some fundamental principles that influence those forms.
So it was like totally driven by the need to have like a view or provide a view for all the rooms. Is that what it is?
Yeah, in that case, yes. Believe me, we won that in the design competition. None of the other projects look like that. That's for sure.
It's terrific. Thank you.
And that's under construction right now. Well under construction. So.
When you're working with some of the huge programs like you showed in the Twin Dragon building or some of the other large institutional buildings you showed, you're obviously working on a scale where a single person can't mastermind these designs. So as a firm, how do you work as a team to create a building with a design that still feels cohesive?
Well, that's a really, really good question. So we're not an office that necessarily, subscribes to like the singular genius attitude, because when you do buildings that are this complex, it takes many, many bright minds to make them happen. Particularly when you try to do integrated design in the way that I was just showing, no single mind can do that. They might be able to lead it in some way, but you need an army of people doing that. So like on that hospital, I might have a team of people that are working on the typical patient room and those floors. I might have a team of people that are working on the operating rooms and the diagnostic and treatment areas that are incredibly technologically complex. And then you have a team of people that are working on the exterior, and a team of people. We have landscape architects in our office too, and a team of people working on the landscape. So, like, there are many, many, many different layers. But the thing that we always try to do, I could have given another lecture that's just about, like, what is the diagram for the building? And so to get a team to work around a concept, you need to have a great diagram or series of diagrams for the building and a story and a narrative about those diagrams that the team knows the story that the building is trying to tell. And so when they get to a moment where there's inconsistency in the story, where they need to change the story, everybody knows why we're doing it. You know, you always have that. So that's something that we try very disciplined. We're very disciplined about in pinups in our office, almost like an academic sense. We have pinups all the time where the whole office is involved. And it's always, what is the story? I don't see the diagram. I don't see it. You're not being clear. You need to articulate that. And so we try to get to that over and over and over again, and that's what helps everybody understand what they're trying to do.
Thank you.
I just want to start by saying that I saw the model of ISIC. It was in the Kogel lobby a few years ago, I think, and that was incredible. It's a really nice model, and that sort of leads into my question. I sort of want to know about the influence of modeling on your firm, because from what you showed in the slides, it seemed very important, and I think we're kind of told that, you know, physical kind of goes away a little bit when you get more into the firm life. So I have a 2-point question. How does modeling, like, improve your work? And also, at the very beginning, do you start with, like, a model, or does it start with, like an idea, or like a massing model, or some sort of sketch?
Wow, that's so a couple things. I believe modeling is essential because for a couple of reasons. Because it's fast. It allows everybody to sort of get around something that you're trying to do, and you can do it rather quickly. It doesn't supplant doing the quick gestural sketches or anything like that. You actually need that to do that first model or the series of models. I believe in iteration. That, like, iteration is so important. You have no idea how having artifacts of process around the office how it affects other projects. You know, there may be some ideas in a project that don't get executed, that get executed somewhere else. You know, so it's really, really important part of the process. You know, in my education, I was educated in a different era from the one we're in now. And I would say when I was educated, models were built almost more as a final thing. They were pristine, they were beautiful, they were precious. In graduate school, I actually, I could do really nice drawings when I was undergrad, and sometimes I think I relied on the drawings as a crutch, where I didn't explore the project as much as I could have. I actually did a beautiful drawing. And I got to the point, was it a beautiful drawing or was it a wonderful project? And so one of the things that I wanted to do with my own studies was actually to be looser, to explore more, and to have the process be, and on some level, almost be the most important part of the journey. And so in that sense, I think the models are key. They are great for motivating staff to understand what we're all trying to do. They make people who are very quiet question things and talk and participate, where they don't with drawings. With clients, they're an amazing thing. It's hard to do it with clients, but when you do it, you accomplish so many things. So one of the things I think is when we're doing the project at Northeastern that was also part of this is we had this idea that we were working on for the form language of that building. And we had that competition model, but we didn't know exactly how we were going to do it yet. And I had never done a building like that. And a person I was always interested about was Eero Saarinen, who had the ability to do incredibly elegant boxes, really, but also the most voluptuous curvilinear forms that you could imagine. And I wanted to know more about his process and how he did things, to understand how he arrived at those forms and what it was. And it was modeling, actually, very large-scale modeling. There's a beautiful, beautiful book about it called Saarinen's Quest. You should read it because it's written by a person, actually, who built a lot of the models on some of his most iconic buildings, and it explains Saarinen's relationship with those models during the process. And he's a very, very difficult architect to get to know because he actually wrote very little. We really just have the artifacts to look at. But this book really does explain that process in a very interesting way. And it helped me when we were beginning that journey of designing that building at Northeastern.
Thank you.
With such open curvilinear forms and a bridge connecting two neighborhoods, your Northeastern campus seems very inviting. I was wondering, how has your project contributed to the urban experience? Have you found that the people in the city are able to own the space, or does it primarily belong to the university and its population?
Well, Northeastern has a very I don't want to say difficult relationship with Roxbury, but has a challenging, it's challenging at times because it's a neighborhood that in the 60s actually was frankly just walled off with that train corridor that there's no way to get from Roxbury to that part of Boston. So there's a lot of, bad feelings associated with that and a lot of suspicion about Northeastern. That being said, Northeastern has done a tremendous amount for that neighborhood. And there were several different master plans that were done for that site prior to our design there. And most of them were formal academic quads that were almost like gated, like Harvard Yard is from Harvard Square. That separated it from the city. We wanted to do something entirely different than that it was an urban space that it wasn't about like, this is not for you. It's more like this is for us. And so it's fully accessible. People ride their bikes across there. People, right now they don't ride their bikes because there's a major project under construction, but it's making it a little difficult. You can still walk across the bridge, but so it's a very, very different landscape. The building, too, is completely open. So even though it's in a very dense urban area, you can just walk right in off the street. Anybody can go to the cafe there, sit outside, do things. So there were a lot of efforts put into those sort of things to help with that. That being said, there is a little bit of a, concern that Northeastern's taking over the neighborhood. So I don't think, we're going to get away from that. But I do think the surprising thing, I did not know how people were going to respond to this building from, outside the Northeastern community. Most people really like it, and they question, it makes them, the whole time it was under construction, you would be just astounded by the number of people that would walk by and they'd be like, and then we'd ask a lot of people and we'd say, what do you think? Are you worried about this? And he goes, and the most humble person you'd meet would say some really interesting things about it. And occasionally you get someone who say, I don't like it, but that's few and far between. It's pretty hard to win the most beautiful building in Boston and not be liked, so that's, but I do think it challenges people's perception of beauty in an interesting way.
So moving from models to fabrication, the one-to-one, obviously that's real important for you, the prototyping. And I was wondering if you've noticed a difficulty in projects that move farther away or to areas with different skill sets. So here you've got, in your backyard, your fins that you're making in-house, and you don't like it, so you tear it down and you remake it. And there's something different maybe about it being close, and your fabricators in Boston. But then like your window in China in the hospital, you built that here, but I don't figure you're going to have your fabricator here build, I forget
well, that's
how many.
an interesting thing. So I would have assumed what you were saying was the case, but what was interesting is once we built that mock-up, that client was never going to come to our office, right?
Right.
We built that mock-up. 4 people from the client came. The contractor came. There was an amazing discussion that happened there where everybody's agreeing, like, you're going to build that, right? You're going to, and we're having that discussion, and that cinched the deal on that window with, we have like 5 different variations on the shroud that goes around it based on, the zigzagging solar angles. We wouldn't have gotten that commitment without that mock-up. And they're totally wed to that idea because of that. So it's interesting. It got them to Boston. So they were so curious to see it. Now,
does it then change when so have you found an influence from other areas on sort of fabrication techniques or methods that you've made things then, sort of like it coming back to you from other places? Because different skill sets obviously exist in different places. But just, you mentioned talking to one of the installers here, and
there are certain areas that we're getting a lot of specialization, like Park McDowell, who many of you met, who was here a couple years ago when we were here with the exhibit. He's fanatical about fabrication, but he's also fanatical about welding. He knows a ton about how to weld things and how to do things. And he's actually become like a resource for a lot of contractors who can't figure out how to do certain things. And he knows how to do those things. So we're getting this type of knowledge. We had the opportunity about 10 or 12 years ago to work on a museum with Renzo Piano. And it was pretty influential just seeing how fabrication played a role in his practice too, and the people in his firm and how they did that. And so that experience, seeing a studio in Genoa and how they do things and who those people were in his practice and how those, the clients go there, right? True, it's Genoa, it's not Boston, but anyway, so it's interesting. Now we're actually getting clients to pay for the mock-ups. Initially, we were doing them for us, and now occasionally we're getting clients to pay for them. For our healthcare projects, we've been building complete typical patient rooms, everything, all the casework. So, not just the window, but that. Those are done a little more primitively, but they've been incredibly successful. So each of the last 4 or 5 hospitals we've done that, a full-scale room. Many of those we build on site. So those so far have been drivable for us. Some are 8 hours, but drivable, and we can normally erect it in 1 day. And then get an enormous amount of feedback from that helps the design.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you.
I think that's all the time we have for today. Can we get another round of applause for Kevin? Thank you so much for the inspiring lecture. It was amazing. Do you have anything else?
No, well, just thanks for inviting me. It's great to be back. And,
Okay.
And please, please, please come up to Boston. Come visit us. Come see our studio. And be interested in the Boston studio, maybe, in the future. So,
Thank you all for coming.
Those guys are doing really good work. You're going to see it. So, and they're fabricating to their heart's content right now. All right.
Thank you.